I'm so upset. Oh my God.
Let's see how Earth responds to that.
Welcome to TYT. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian, and we have a jam-packed show for you. As usual, we, in fact, are going to talk about yet another provision in yet another bill that would merge elements of the Israeli government with our own. In this case, we're talking about intelligence. We wouldn't simply share intelligence. It would go far beyond that. And I will be talking about that at the top of the show. Following that story, though, we're going to give you some pretty serious updates on what is transpiring in the Middle East. The kinetic warfare between the United States and Iran is very much happening. And we'll talk about what the Trump administration is pointing to as their justification for restarting or reigniting, strikes against Iran, and Iran has responded, so we'll give you those details. A little later, we'll also give you updates on both the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and we'll round out this hour with a discussion of more Zionist entities buying up more of our media to essentially control the narrative of what Americans hear about what is transpiring in the Middle East. But luckily, you've got independent media, you've got shows like The Young Turks, lots of other shows like Breaking Points, for instance. And if you can help and support us, it would be appreciated. You can do so for free by liking and sharing the stream, or you can become a paid member by going to tyt.com/join. And luckily, today to co-host with me in the first hour is Trita Parsi, co-founder of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, and also someone who is substacking away with his insights on Iran and what's going on in the Middle East. So make sure you subscribe to that. Trita, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
I'm excited as well, and I'm so grateful that there are, publications like Responsible Statecraft drawing attention to what we're about to talk about. So let's get into it. So, not only is Congress attempting to merge the Israeli Defense Forces with our own military in Section 224 of the National Defense Authorization Act, it looks like Congress is also pushing to fuse our intelligence agencies together as part of an intelligence authorization bill. Now, this is not getting the type of attention Section 224 is getting, but hopefully we can spread the word about this and stop it from getting passed. So this was covered in Responsible Statecraft. The piece is titled, Senate Wants to Force US to Share Sensitive Intel with Israel. A measure in a must-pass bill would dramatically increase Israeli access to American secrets. So the details are laid out in this piece written by Paul Pillar, and basically the bill was put forward by Republican Senator Tom Cotton, which is unsurprising. He is certainly very favorable to the nation state of Israel. And Pillar writes that Section 622 would prohibit any suspension, reduction, or limitation of such intelligence sharing except on the basis of a specific and identifiable national security concern determined by the president. Now, if the president of the United States is the only check on this intelligence sharing, mechanism, we'd be in a lot of trouble, especially if you're dealing with presidents like Donald Trump, who has given Israel everything and anything they've wanted, even at the detriment of the American people, even at the detriment of the Republican Party. But there is one other so-called check on this mechanism. As Pillar writes, any such exception would require a report to Congress within 15 days detailing not only the reason for the change, but also the categories of information involved. The same report would require an assessment of the anticipated impact on regional security and various other matters. So this required report to Congress would essentially dump the issue on Capitol Hill, where you also have a big problem with the Israel lobby corrupting our politicians and basically persuading them to carry out actions that wouldn't even necessarily benefit the United States. So this is basically a way for our government to carry water for Israel, despite the reality that the majority in the United States, the majority of voters have an unfavorable view of Israel and in fact want to halt military aid to Israel. The mandating of intelligence sharing, as Pilar writes, is even farther removed from public visibility and accountability than the defense integration, and even less likely to stimulate thoughts about American taxpayers' money going to a foreign country. And so to help us make some sense of this reporting and what the future holds for the US should this pass is Trita Parsi. Trita, thank you, by the way, for co-founding a publication that actually informs Americans about what's going on, because no one in the mainstream press is reporting about this provision in the intelligence authorization bill. But talk to us a little bit about just how disastrous this really would be, how it could potentially work against our own interests here in the United States.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for also bringing attention to this. And let me start off by saying two things. First, a tremendous amount of credit needs to go to Kelly Blaus, who is the editor of Responsible Statecraft and has really done a remarkable job building it up to be one of the largest foreign policy sites in the United States right now, that is specifically putting forward a restraint-oriented analysis and perspective on matters. And it's one of these places where things like this can get published, because we do have amazing, and this is the second point, experts such as Paul Pilar. Paul is a legend. He is a senior person who was the author of several NIEs when he was at the CIA. He is one of the key people who pushed back against Dick Cheney when he was trying to cook the intelligence on the Iraq War. In fact, there's some minor roles in Hollywood that have been dedicated to the role that he played in all of this. And his analysis, of course, is just state of the art. And what he's pointing out here is that while we are seeing this broader process in which the Israelis are just plummeting amongst the American public on every demographic, with the exception of boomer Republicans, they are desperately moving forward with some extremely aggressive measures to try to essentially take what in the past was in the public domain and had some checks and balances, reinforce it, but put it somewhere else within the interaction between the two countries so that it is out of the public domain. It is not scrutinized by the public or by Congress, or that there isn't a vote up and down like for what was going to happen with 224 if it passes, that essentially embeds Israel in some of the US's production of weapons, etc. And now we're doing the same thing on the intelligence front. And he points out in the article the irony that the Congress has given up its constitutional responsibility on matters of war and peace, but then wants to come in and micromanage how intelligence is being shared with Israel, with the normal state being that everything essentially has to be shared. And only if there is something that shouldn't, that's when the president has to intervene in order to make sure that something is not shared with the Israelis. And he goes into the article extensively on how this is also then going to create a lot of problems with other countries, because we have to manage these different relations. We have, full-time staff that is managing to make sure that intelligence is not shared in a manner that could be detrimental to other allies. And the United States, of course, has a very extensive alliance system. But it's also happening with a country that has an extensive history of taking US intelligence, spying on the US, or having spies inside the system that has been selling that information to hostile states, whether that is to the Soviet Union, which is what Jonathan Pollock did, or whether it is to the Chinese. And this comes in the heel of the fact that we had a New York Times story that revealed that the Israeli espionage on key individuals within the US government right now is now at an all-time high. I think the way he put it in the article, referring to it is like it's completely unhinged at this point. So we have a state that in the intelligence setting, Paul points out, is actually an adversary rather than an ally. And now Congress is going to mandate the exchange or the release of that information to the Israelis. And if anything needs to be stopped, the president himself needs to intervene. I mean, it's a ridiculous notion, but it tells you how far they're going and trying to get these kind of things into place before they completely lose the American public. And once they do, it will take a long time to undo a lot of these different things.
I think you're absolutely right about that. And just to really drive that point home, I want to show the audience and you a video that I think you might be a little bit surprised by. Because historically speaking, in the United States, there's always been some dissent among the left in regard to the US alliance with Israel. That wasn't really the case with right-wingers or people who can lean conservatively or as conservatives. And so what's been arising as a result of the last nearly 3 years is a group of conservatives who are not only questioning our relationship with Israel, but they're increasingly becoming agitated with the amount of aid that the United States is forced, the taxpayers in the United States are forced to provide to Israel, a country that had an economic surplus in 2021, when we, at this current moment, are drowning in $40 trillion in debt. And so this next video is a prominent conservative and former Navy SEAL. His name is Sean Ryan, and I happened to be listening to his podcast just yesterday, and this moment really stood out to me. And so, he speaks like a Navy SEAL would. So just take a listen to this.
Israel is the one thing since 9/11 that I've seen everybody rallying around. Get off our.
Yep.
We're tired of paying for your education. We're tired of paying for your universal health care. We're tired of paying for your Iron Dome. We're tired of paying for your missile defense. We are a cow pasture for Israel. We're tired of fighting your wars. We're tired of dying for your causes. And everybody sees that the United States of America is nothing but a cow pasture full of cattle to send tax money and fight the wars.
Trita, your reaction to that?
Look, I gotta tell you, amongst a lot of former officials, amongst a lot of former military servicemen, I've come across perhaps not as colorful of a language as we saw here, but the sentiment by no means is at this point unusual. This is not a fringe opinion at this point. This is an opinion that is widely shared. And I think this is one of the things that folks on the left also did not pay as much attention to. That the turn against the relationship or the manner in which this relationship with Israel is so unbalanced, the way it's turned against that on the right is very, very fast, very hard. And perhaps surprising some folks on the left. It has not come out of some sort of a sympathy or empathy with the Palestinians. Now, although we're also seeing some growth of that on the right, but particularly with people like Tucker and others. But it's not necessarily the main reason for it. The main reason is that you have a lot of folks on the right who have come to the conclusion that most of these past wars have been for the service of or the interest of another country. And they feel that they have become completely screwed over. They're the ones, the average American soldier is not coming from the left. The majority of them, of course, are coming from poorer districts in the South and other areas. And that it's these districts, the red districts, where you have American soldiers coming home in coffins with PTSD, committing suicide, losing a limb. And it's just created this festering anger as to why they've been sent off to all of these wars. And at first, the anger was at the American elite for having done so, and that's still there. But now it's also extended itself to these other countries that have played a critical role in bringing the United States into these wars. And even if there was this tension earlier on, if we say 5 years ago, there would have been a lot of tension because a lot of the folks on the right were becoming angry about this, but at the same time, they had this pro-Israel tilt and they were like uncomfortable really breaking with Israel. I think the breaking points came last February and last June. Because as soon as Trump came into office, and these folks, they had their other agendas, they wanted to focus on fentanyl, they wanted to focus on border issues. And the first things that happen is that the Israelis come to Washington. And this is just a couple of weeks after, 2 or 3 weeks after Trump takes office. And immediately they're pushing him for a war with Iran. And you had these stories coming out in the New York Times of how much they were pushing and how in the first round of that debate, they lost. But they kept at it. They kept at it and started attacking a lot of American officials who were too opposed to it and softened them. And then by May, the decision seems to have been shifted. And by June, they attack and the US then joins in. And Trump, who was supposed to say no to these things, who had promised to keep the neocons out of his administration in this second round, ended up going along with it. And unlike the Iraq war, in which was a little bit more murky, what was the role of Israel? And in this one, it was just crystal clear that the Israelis were pushing for it. There was no denying, there was no attempt to obfuscate, to confuse people about it. It was just utterly clear that this was the Israelis doing this. And then again, in December of last year, when the beginning of this second war started off with the initial pressure to go to war. So, there's no mystery any longer. Yes, a lot of countries have pushed the United States into war. They have treated the United States as some sort of a private mercenary army that is at their disposal. But no country has done so more than Israel. And once these things break on the right, they tend to break really fast and really hard. And that's part of the reason why you're seeing such a colorful language coming from a lot of folks who have served, who feel betrayed, but not only by their own leaders, but also now understanding that their leaders were not only acting on their own interest or for whatever factors and reasons they had, but also because of the pressure that they were faced with by foreign countries. And particularly when it comes to the Middle East, it's clearly Israel that is the main factor.
I want to ask you something that does call for some speculation, which I know you don't like to do, but I am really curious what you think, because that comparison between the invasion of Iraq and what we're doing now in Iran is a really important one, because you're right, there was murkiness. It was harder to decipher whether Israel had an influence on whether we decided to engage in that preemptive war. However, this time around with Iraq, the Israelis didn't really feel the need to shroud what they were doing in any secrecy whatsoever. They were rubbing it in our faces from the very beginning. Netanyahu saying that he's dreamed of the day that the United States would go to war with Iran. He was very open about that. You have Donald Trump bragging about how he has a 99% approval rating among the Israelis, while his approval rating here in the United States is 30%. And so it's hard to deny that we are fighting a war, not on behalf of what's in the best interest of the American people, but we're fighting a war on behalf of Israel to our detriment and the detriment of the global economy. Why do you think the Israelis feel as emboldened as they are right now to basically tell us right to our faces what they're gonna do? And may I add, they've also been pretty clear about how they intend or are pushing for US boots on the ground, which I don't think is gonna happen, but would be disastrous if it would. They don't want to send IDF soldiers there, and they just say it brazenly. Why do you think they feel emboldened to do that?
I think there's a couple of factors, and I can't really weigh them against each other to say which ones are the most important one, but I'll just name a few of them that I can think of right on the spot. First of all, I think the Israelis saw the writing on the wall. They realized that they did not have much more time. They were losing the American public, and they were losing particularly the younger generation, both on the left and on the right. It's very important to recognize that the numbers on the American right amongst the young people is not that different from what it is on the American left when it comes to the issue of Israel. And as a result, if they needed to achieve anything, they had to do it quickly. They were in a rush. And as a result, I don't think they believed that they had the time necessarily to go through all of the different moves or trying to conceal what they were doing. I think that's one factor. Another factor I think is very important is that after October 7th, you had this situation that Biden himself created. The entire strategy of Biden, they call it themselves a bear hug. Let's give Israel everything it asks for. And that then, for some reason, would give the United States leverage, which is such a problematic and idiotic approach, to be frank with you, because first of all, it assumes that the United States starts off that equation with no credibility or leverage to begin with. In what universe does the United States not have leverage to begin with? And that he actually has to do something like that, give the Israelis everything they want so they can commit a genocide in order to have leverage. It makes absolutely no sense. But Biden set the stage for this. And Trump is, of course, completely following that at this point. And I think it gave them a completely different confidence. You can ignore the American public if you have a president that is willing to go along with what you're selling them. And particularly if you can cut the rest of the bureaucracy in the United States out and you go directly to the president, which was not so much the case under Biden, although there was a bit of that as well. but certainly is the case right now. And when you listen to someone like Joe Kent, who resigned over this, is because the parts of the very important parts of the U.S. government that he was in was cut out, and the president was not taking into account the perspectives and the intelligence that was coming from the U.S. government itself, but instead was listening directly to the Israelis. And under those circumstances, they have an ability to get a quick decision that completely fast circuits the rest of the policy process. Frankly, there's not much of a policy process in the U.S. government right now. And when you have that type of an opportunity from their perspective, they're going to move fast instead of going through the other motions in which they're trying to push the country in a direction while keeping their fingerprints off it as far as possible. And I'm sure there's other factors as well, but I think it's first of all, I think it's very important to note what you're saying, because if you just go back 7 or 8 years, the proponents of war did not argue explicitly for war. The proponents of war were arguing against all other options and trying to kill the credibility of all other options in order to make war the only remaining option, but without actively arguing in favor of it. Look at how FDD was couching its arguments a couple of years ago. Getting really upset, feigning some anger if anyone accused them of being warmongers. But now it's just completely open.
Yeah, now they're letting their freak flag fly.
Exactly.
Yeah, we love more. We want more. Yeah.
Because they have direct access.
Yeah.
Because they go straight to the top. They can ignore the American public. They believe that they can afford to, they can achieve it, and as a result, they don't need to. And instead, they're not, their audience is not the American public. They go on Fox because their audience is an audience of one. They want to reach the president directly. Yeah. So they're putting forward all of their different arguments, and their arguments with him has to be something big, something historic, something that brings a legacy. And I think they've been very astute at playing him and his psychology and the type of arguments that he would be susceptible to.
Well, what's ironic about this whole situation is the war against Iran at this moment has made Israel less safe, not more safe. And when we come back from the break, I want to give you the latest updates on the war against Iran because kinetic action has been reignited. And I don't think that's a good thing for Israel. It's certainly not a good thing for the United States or the global economy. So that and more coming up. Don't miss it. Welcome to our first social break of the day. A lot of people are excited to have Trita with us, as I am. Anikvi has become a new member. Thank you for becoming a new member. So has Kyoko and Jason Ruwach. I hope I pronounced everyone's names correctly. Thank you for supporting the show, and I hope you guys enjoy the members-only bonus episode tonight after the main show. Joe Camel says, I'm starting a few minutes late. Trita is co-hosting I can't say the next word, crap. This is going to be double awesome. Thanks, Anna and TYT. Well, thank you to Trita for being generous with his time to co-host with me today. Let's see, we've got our Twitch subs. Canadian Skull Dragon says, Trump's a moron, he'll be the death of us. Let's hope he won't be the death of us, okay? But he has been responsible for the death of innocents in the Middle East, certainly, and in the Caribbean, as we all know. Chi-Town's Finest says, have you all seen Gwyneth Paltrow selling luxury real estate in Gaza? I have seen it, and it's disgusting, absolutely disgusting. So the absolute rage and backlash that has spurred, I think, is well-deserved. Let's go over to more of our members. Where CDN Norse Dog Dad gifted 1 TYT membership. Thank you so much. And I'll read a few more comments because we gotta go. Silver Edge says, how the F can this even get past the gate? We are so incredibly controlled. You know how I agree with you on that one. Anyway, let's get back to the show. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Anna Kasparian and Trita Parsi with you. I want to tell you about one of our sponsors, Noble Mobile, that's offering 3 months for free. So if you're looking to have a phone plan where you don't have to pay for 3 months, check it out over at tyt.com/switch. For a limited time, new customers get the first 3 months free, no tricks, no catch, the whole summer, totally free. That's money you can spend doing things you actually enjoy. And if you're still not convinced, Noble Mobile actually pays you to use your phone less. The less data you use, the more cash back you get right into your account. And you're still getting great, reliable coverage on T-Mobile's 5G network. All right, well, let's get to the latest updates out of Iran, and they're not good.
They shot at our helicopter, very expensive helicopter, by the way, but much more importantly, the two men, fortunately, they're okay. We hit them hard yesterday, and we're gonna hit them again hard today, in case you miss it, in case you don't turn on your television set. And we'll see what happens with the deal. We were really close to a deal, but they keep tapping us along. They keep playing us for suckers because you know what? They dealt with some very stupid presidents.
President Trump is using an alleged Iranian attack on an Apache helicopter near the Strait of Hormuz to justify reigniting war with Iran. Now, the claim is that an Iranian Shahed drone struck the helicopter. Take a look at this.
President Trump tells Fox News that the Iranian drone lodged in between the two pilots in this helicopter. They were flying very low. And at that point, the drone didn't explode as it had intended to. And so these pilots were trying to take down the helicopter with the drone lodged into this gunship without it exploding. And at any moment, it could have exploded, the president told me. And he said it was on fire. There was a lot of heat inside the cockpit of this helicopter. And ultimately, these two pilots were able to take it down into the sea, where ultimately they were rescued for the first time in US military history by an unmanned sea drone.
Now, if those claims sound outlandish, you wouldn't be the only one who thinks so. In fact, military experts like Colonel Daniel Davis and former CIA analyst Larry Johnson had a conversation about this alleged attack. And they bring up some points that are relevant if you want to see whether or not this is true. Let's take a look at their analysis, and then we'll bring Trita in to give us his take. Take a look.
That drone, the Shahed there it's the size of the cockpit. I mean, the whole cockpit. There's no way it could get in between them and just sit there like a ticking time bomb.
This is this Shahed drone there. So you see how big it is. So if these are the size of two pilots that you can see there, the guys who were standing right next to it, and then here is the H-64 from a different angle here. And as you're talking about this cockpit has to rise up, go upwards. So there's no side door to get out. So almost any version of anything, quote, in the cockpit window makes it nearly physically impossible to have escaped. So the story can't be true,
right?
In terms of, and then again, look back at this. Now imagine this embedded in this. How's that even possible? It can't hang in there. It can't lodge in there as big as this thing is. It would just destroy the helicopter if it hit it. There's no scenario that this is the drone that they talked about, is going to hit this and it not just blast it out of the sky.
So considering the fact that the Trump administration appears to be using this alleged attack on the Apache helicopter as their rationale for re-engaging in this war with Iran, I think it's important to figure out whether or not they're lying about it. And so Trita, for whatever it's worth, I know you might not be a military expert, but I'm super curious what you might be hearing from your sources in regard to this alleged attack, because I remember yesterday, Iran was basically denying it, but has anything changed since then?
I've not seen anything from the Iranians claiming that they were the ones that were behind it. In fact, the pattern at this point has been that very different from the past, in which the Iranians were trying to make sure that they had plausible deniability, that they were doing things without their fingerprints on it. that's not the pattern as of late. So if they did do it, there's a significant likelihood that they would take credit for it or claim it. They have not, doesn't mean that, their side of the story is true either. Most conversations I've had, however, about this, to be frank with Jana, has just completely moved beyond whether this story is true or not. Because a new reality is now establishing. The United States is attacking Iran, and the Iranians are now firing ballistic missiles again. So it appears at this point that the ceasefire is officially over and that we are back at war. And much to unpack about that, because what are the calculations? What are the things that the two sides think that they can achieve, et cetera? And at the end of it, if it turns out that all of this was started over a lie, over an Apache, that would be a fantastic story, or it would be an interesting story in different ways. But at this point, it seems like there's a desire to go back to the battlefield. Whatever the reason is, whatever the pretext is, whatever the excuse is, there's a desire to go back to the battlefield. And to be frank with you, Anna, I'm sensing it from both sides, not just from the US side.
I mean, I can understand why Iran would want to re-engage. And if everything that's been reported is in fact true, math is math, and Iran has more weaponry than the United States has, certainly as it pertains to interceptors. And not just the United States, Israel is running out of interceptors. And these are interceptors that are difficult and they take a long time to build. The drones are much easier and faster to build. And then on top of that, the drones aren't necessary, they're able to evade the interceptors. Again, my mind wanders back to how badly Israel wanted the war to start again. Knowing their own limitations, why would they want that unless, and this is the most cynical thought I've ever had in my mind, but I asked you about it last week and you said that it's not as outlandish as someone might think. There's a possibility that maybe they're gonna wait for Iran to do so much damage to Israel that Israel might use, unconventional weapons, nuclear weapons, to retaliate and then justify it based on how much pain they were suffering as a result of these ballistic missile strikes.
Yeah, so unfortunately, we are in this space right now in which both in the Israeli media and in the US media, we have articles that are openly talking about the fact that the nuclear option has been considered, has been part of the discussions. They don't go into any further details beyond that, but that's really where we are. So it's not outlandish, and it's not, however insane it actually is, unfortunately, it is not outlandish. I think we have a situation in which the Israelis from the outset never wanted a ceasefire, and they wanted to continue the war, and they wanted the United States to just destroy as much of Iran as possible. And we're very disappointed that he opted for a ceasefire. And the Israelis show very little regard of how all of this is affecting the global economy, the American taxpayer, et cetera. Because at the end of the day, the Israeli economy has been very quite insulated from all of this.
How? How is that possible? Is it just because
it's a very good question.
We're bankrolling everything and they don't have to worry about it?
I don't know the full answer, but I do believe that the subsidies that are coming from the United States one way or another is part of the reason. Of course, they're not importing any oil from the Persian Gulf, but so is, other countries are also not necessarily buying it from the Persian Gulf, but they're still affected by very high oil prices. What I think happened here is that the Iranians and the Americans both were open to find a way out. But their ideas of what that would be was very different. And over time, even though when there's been moments in which there's been significant progress, it's just been a very bizarre negotiating process. And Trump has changed his positions several times in these negotiations. And on the other hand, the Iranians, they even admitted, they say, we have not said yes, we have not said no. So they have not given the type of a clarity that Trump is constantly looking for. And Trump's inclination is to really, escalate and put more pressure and use worse language when he doesn't get what he wants, and particularly when he feels that the other side is stringing him along. I don't think necessarily the Iranians are stringing him along. It's just that they're negotiating, and he's saying, "Well, this is my offer; take it or leave it." And I know I'm simplifying a little bit here. The problem is this. Both sides believe that the underlying balance that has been created from the first war needs to change in order to make a deal possible. Because whatever it changed, it didn't change it enough. So the US wants to change it in a manner to really put the Iranians into a corner so that they're forced to agree to whatever the terms is that the US puts forward. The Iranians believe that they will take huge amount of tactical hits, but strategically they will come out of the second war stronger, just as they did with the first war, because they gained the leverage of the Strait of Hormuz. But now they're hurting because of the blockade, and they want to push back against that, and they think they have to do that militarily. There's absolutely no guarantee that either side will be right in this. Both of them may completely lose out of this situation. Everyone else in the world certainly will be losing, because there's a very significant difference between the moment we're starting this war and the moment in which the war was started back in February. Back then, by happenstance, oil inventory globally was very, very high. And as a result, there was a buffer against these rising oil prices and the shortages of fuel that was being created as a result of the closure of the Hormuz. Those inventories are now very low, which means that if you start the war again now, we're going to see much higher oil prices, unless, of course, it ends up being a short war or a very short successful war. And so far, we haven't seen anything short and successful.
Right. I mean, we've been tapping into our strategic oil reserves, and we are set to run out pretty quickly. By the end of the summer is one of the more generous estimates that I've heard analysts mention. But I want to note that, the Wall Street Journal is reporting that the individual who allegedly pressured or goaded President Trump to engage in more strikes against Iran was our Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. So they write that Trump hadn't been convinced of the need to retaliate against Iran earlier in the day, US officials said. He changed his mind after Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, recommended military action during a briefing at the White House. But it remains unclear what would be accomplished by engaging militarily, because there really isn't a military option to accomplish some of the objectives that Trump had laid out in the beginning of the war. And it does, at least right now, appear that Trump is carrying out some of what he promised to do earlier in one of the most controversial posts that he put up on social media. They're attacking civilian infrastructure, namely basically water reservoirs. So this is from Dropsite News. They write, a reported US attack on 2 water reservoirs in southern Iran has left 20,000 people without access to drinking water, according to their Mizan news agency. In a statement, the local Iranian water utility company said the reservoirs were targeted and completely destroyed on Wednesday morning in US strikes. And so I really hope that it doesn't keep going in this direction, but with someone like Trump, I wouldn't be, and someone like Trump who has packed his cabinet with warmongers and unhinged individuals like Pete Hegseth, I don't really have much hope. But I am curious what your thoughts are. Do you think that this is just, with the US re-engaging militarily, do you think that they're just gonna try to destroy as much of Iran as possible on behalf of Israel? And if so, what would that accomplish? Would that even spur regime change in Iran?
So we have to recognize, first of all, we're operating in the fog of war and the fog of information. And it's very difficult to know whether the information is reliable or not. There's a lot of backstabbing taking place in the White House right now. Different leaks coming out to put certain people in a good light or a bad light. So it's still unclear about that. But if it is true that the targets that we're seeing the US strike so far is around the Strait of Hormuz, it would lend itself to one plausible scenario, which is that the Trump administration in the last couple of weeks have managed to open up a bit of that strait and gotten some tankers out. And they have found out a manner in which the Iranians have difficulty of closing certain parts of the strait. And they're now trying to further limit the Iranians' ability to do so by striking some of these key areas very close to the strait, while simultaneously reducing Iran's ability to challenge Trump's blockade of the blockade. And then thinking that if they can do this without massive Iranian retaliation, that would force further escalation of the war, which I don't think they're going to achieve, because I think the Iranians are going to retaliate and escalate horizontally as they did before. But they think that they may be able to do this without having that repercussion. If that happens, they will pull back and then say, okay, now you have a new scenario. The strait is partially open and you have failed to challenge the blockade of the blockade. As a result, time is not on your side. You're going to get a worse situation. And as a result, you should agree to whatever the terms are that Trump will put forward at that point, which probably will be harsher than the terms are right now. I can see that scenario, particularly if the strikes continue to be limited to that area. If, however, the strikes are starting to go in many different parts of Iran, and particularly if it goes after infrastructure and petrochemical plants and energy infrastructure, then I think we're looking at something much, much different. That is, a level of escalation that the Trump administration was much more careful about in the first war. The Israelis kept on pushing him to go in that direction. He didn't. He didn't because he knew that the Iranians would take out those facilities on the GCC side and it would be a disastrous situation, particularly for the energy markets. But if they're going in that direction, then we're looking at a completely different type of an escalation that Trump has in mind.
Have you gotten any word on how Iran has responded to US strikes so far?
Only that we've only seen so far that there is reports that ballistic missiles have been fired. By now, they probably have landed somewhere, I don't know. I presume that there would be significant strikes against Israel again. And of course, some escalation in the region. All depends on what the first American strikes were. If the initial American strikes also included, and there's been some reporting on the Iranian side, which then has been denied by other Iranian state reporting, that there's been targeting of petrochemical plants, etc. But if that ends up being the case, then I think we will see a much larger escalation, and both sides will probably go harder at each other than they did in the first war. And the Iranians in particular will probably draw the conclusion that they did not escalate hard enough in the first war before they agreed to a ceasefire. So this has all of the hallmarks of a completely uncontrollable escalation, unfortunately.
Absolutely, and it's not the most important thing. I mean, innocent human lives and saving those innocent human lives, I believe, is the most important thing. But this does have repercussions for the global economy, and certainly Americans are already starting to experience it when it comes to inflation in the broader economy here in the United States. The latest Labor Department reporting indicates that inflation is accelerating. From last month, it's already accelerated. And so Trump was actually asked about inflation related to this war. I want to go to video B5 and then get your thoughts on it, Shrita. Take a look.
You know what I really love? I love the inflation. You know why? Because as soon as this war is over, I can say it now. Something you didn't know. We've been taking out millions of barrels of oil. Nobody knows it. You know who doesn't know about it? Iran, until right now. We took out the other night 22 ships. Late at night with no lights, because they don't have any radar, because we blasted the crap out of it. We took out, that's why oil's $85 a barrel.
In fact, $85 a barrel, but nonetheless, I mean, I can't trust anything that this man says. But I do want to know if you have any clarity on what he's referring to when he says that we basically stole Iranian oil and that oil prices are actually fantastic.
Clearly, oil prices are not fantastic. I think there's been, around 16 or so oil tankers that have been attacked. And in the past, the United States, even under the Biden administration, did confiscate oil tankers, Iranian oil tankers on the high seas. You had a scenario in which a lot of the different Iranian oil tankers that were selling oil to China would have to turn off their transponders so that they wouldn't be visible to the United States. So even under the Biden administration, this was happening. So it wouldn't be surprising at all if that is part of what they have done. The Iranians have tried to get some tankers out of the straits. They have succeeded in some cases, but they may also have failed, and in which the US, I think just last night, there was an attack against an oil tanker and they confiscated it. But I also think that there's a hint to the fact that they have managed to open a small sliver of the straits. There's not much traffic coming out of it, obviously, at the end of the day. But essentially, they do believe that there is a potential here for them to really be able to change the equation by getting more ships out while the Iranians continue to not be able to get ships in or out. Because one thing that is forgotten about this blockade of the blockade that Trump is imposing is that he's also preventing food, medicine, and other things to get into Iran.
Absolutely, and that is reflected in the price of food already, but it's gonna have downstream effects that are gonna be far more extreme than what we're already experiencing, which is what makes this war just so utterly stupid. The idea that this is gonna accomplish anything positive for the global community, for the United States is laughable. It remains to be seen if Israel is gonna have its way or get what it wants through what we're engaging in militarily. For now, we're gonna take a quick break. We'll give you updates as they come on the war on Iran. But in the meantime, we'll take a quick break and we'll come back with some more news, including updates on what's happening to the Palestinians, not just in Gaza, but also the West Bank. Stick around. In our members section says the Pentagon raised its counterintelligence threat assessment for Israel to critical. It's the highest possible level due to escalating concerns that Israeli intelligence agencies are actively spying on senior US officials. Yes, a story that I've been talking about all week because it is an important story for people to know about. This is supposed to be our special ally, the ally that we provide the absolute most military and financial aid to. And they've been spying on US officials to the point where our intelligence community feels that they pose more of a counterintelligence threat than some of our adversaries. Just think about that for a second. It's absolutely insane. Let's go to Eclectic Miscellanea, who says, what are they smoking in Washington? Well, they did find cocaine at the White House once. How could anyone think that fusing our intelligence services with any country would be a good idea? We shouldn't do it with France, much less Israel. Do they just hope voters don't care enough to try to stop this? I do think they're under the impression that Americans are just gonna take it, because let's just be honest, Americans have been tolerating a lot. So we'll see what happens, but I obviously agree with you. This is insane, and it feels as though our government is selling our country out. In our Twitch community, we have Angry Clam, who says we need to drop the Democrat and Republican monikers and start saying Israel first versus actual America first. A lot of people are starting to see it that way, and I don't blame them. Ryu Raul says, excuse me, Anna, her name is Genocide Paltrow. Fair. And Chi-Town's Finest says US-Israel is now the new axis of evil. It's been for a while, unfortunately. Let's get back to the show. Welcome back to the show. Anna Kasparian and Trita Parsi with you. Well, Trita, and to our audience, unfortunately, the plight of the Palestinians has not improved at all. It's only gotten worse as the world has turned away to focus on other issues, including Israel's assault on Lebanon and the war against Iran. But I do think it's important to give you these updates because while some are under the impression that there's been a ceasefire in Gaza, the reality on the ground shows that nothing could be further from the truth. Let's get into it. What you are witnessing right now on your screens is what's left of the Gaza Strip. Just absolute dystopian nightmare that's been carried out by the Israeli government, by the Israeli military, with the help of the United States, with the use of US bombs. And as the world shifts its focus to the Israeli-led bloodshed in Lebanon or the war in Iran, Israel continues carrying out genocide in Gaza. That's just the fact on the ground, and they have no intention of letting up. So Azmi Abu Sharbri, who is a Palestinian who lives in a neighborhood east of Gaza City, told Dropsite News, quote, "The war has returned. Every day there are tens of martyrs and tens of wounded. It has returned, but without being announced. There is no coverage of Gaza. It is all about Iran and all about Lebanon, and Gaza is bombed every day and slaughtered every day." And one story that has brought Gaza back into people's attention is the unbelievable fatal shooting of a 7-month-old baby. So this video is really difficult. I want to give you guys a warning before we show it to you, but first let me give you some context. So according to Drop Site News, 8-year-old Jad Suleiman was walking home from school in the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza on Monday when an Israeli airstrike hit. So this is actually a different story out of Gaza. We're gonna talk about what happened in the West Bank in just a minute. But in this case, a piece of shrapnel struck him in the neck, killing him instantly. Jad's father, Yosef Suleiman, was beyond grief. He wept uncontrollably as he bent over his son's lifeless body. He had removed his son's backpack and was clutching it to his chest. My son is 8 years old. What was his crime? He was coming home from school. This is his bag. There's blood on it. This is his bag. This is his bag. He repeated, unable to continue. The boy's aunt also spoke to Drop Site News and said, you leave your house not knowing whether you are going to return or whether you are going to die. There is blood in the streets. It's enough, enough. Where is the ceasefire people are talking about? So what the West is laughably referring to as a ceasefire in Gaza has officially entered its 9th month, okay? And so since October 10th of 2025, when this ceasefire was agreed to, nearly 1,000 people have been slaughtered by the IDF in Gaza. Another 3,000 people have been wounded. More than 1,400 airstrikes have been carried out against Gaza, and there have been 1,200 shooting incidents. And you might be wondering, what is Israel bombing? They've already leveled Gaza. What are they targeting? In some cases, they're literally targeting tents. And it's just endless. It's endless, and the world has turned their attention away from it. May was the deadliest month in 2026 for Palestinians in Gaza, with at least 119 killed, including, of course, 19 children, according to the Gaza Health Ministry, which noted an escalation in mass killings and assassinations that the Israeli occupation forces continue to perpetuate against Palestinian civilians in the Gaza Strip. It's just horrific, Trita, and we're just talking about Gaza. The West Bank has been an absolute disaster as well, and we're gonna talk a little bit about what happened with that 7-month-old baby. But before we get to that, I'd love to hear your thoughts about what's happening in Gaza.
The person who gave that testimony is, of course, absolutely right. Gaza has completely fallen off, not just the headlines, but the political agenda as well. Essentially, it's been brushed aside. A fake ceasefire has been put in place, and the pressure that actually was reaching a certain point in Europe, for instance, to do something about it was evaded because of the Board of Peace, because of other initiatives that from the outset was very clear was not going to bring about any change. So, for instance, a vote was about to be held within UEFA, which is the European Soccer Federation, to actually exclude Israel altogether. This would have been devastating for Israeli soccer because it's so subsidized by UEFA. But the votes were there for it, and the pressure was mounting back in September of last year to actually force a vote. But because of the announcement of a ceasefire, because of an announcement of later on that came about a Board of Peace, they managed to evade it. Israel is still in UEFA. It's going to be a disaster this year because they're going to be playing in Ireland and other places that are extremely negative to what the Israelis have done. But it's an example of how when the pressure actually is about to get to some place that actually can bring about certain change. And by the way, I do think that the Israel being kicked out of UEFA would have a significant impact because so far much of the Israeli public is under the sentiment that there really hasn't been much of a cost for them at all conducting this genocide and expanding the settlements and doing the pogroms in the West Bank. There really, frankly, has not been anything. Whereas something like this would be painful. And we do have that as an example in the South Africa apartheid case as well, in which surveys that were afterwards done amongst white South Africans, it was stunning to a lot of the people who were conducting the surveys that it turned out that it was the sports sanctions more than anything else that caused people in South Africa of the Boers or the white South Africans to turn against apartheid, because that was felt in a much, much more direct way than the economic sanctions.
Mm-hmm.
So those ports actually can have a significant impact. But every time we've been close to being able to get some movement on that, there's been some sort of a measure made, a false measure ultimately, that has taken all of that pressure away.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think, what Trump did with this fake ceasefire was run interference. So Israel would be protected and people would be under the impression that everything's okay. We've now got a ceasefire in place and we're gonna rebuild Gaza. And you're right, from the very beginning, it was very obvious that this was an empty gesture. Meant to not help the Palestinian people, not to rebuild Gaza, but to essentially move everyone's attention off of that story. But it's not just Gaza where Palestinians are suffering the cruelty of Israel's policies, because if you look at the West Bank, there's a story that's gone very viral because of the fact that there was a 7-month-old who was killed, and the IDF was caught lying because we have video evidence of what they actually did. So earlier this week, an Israeli soldier shot into a vehicle that was carrying a Palestinian family, and as a result, killed a 7-month-old baby named Sam Abu Hakal. The Israeli Defense Forces said the troops had perceived a vehicle accelerating toward them, and that one of the soldiers had responded with single shots toward the vehicle. But we're gonna watch the footage. This is what I was giving you all a trigger warning about, because it is it's the story, just hearing about it is difficult enough. Watching it is not fun. Let's just put it that way. But let's take a look at it. We'll keep my mic up and I'll describe what you're viewing. So this is on June 5th, 2026 in the West Bank. A man by the name of Fad Abu Hakal had slowed his car. You could literally see the vehicle slow down, okay? And it does come to a stop. Their son and grandmother was in the vehicle as well. They posed no danger. However, the soldier shot at the vehicle, wounding the family members and killing Sam after he was shot in the head. So after the video came out and it was clear that the IDF was lying about how this vehicle posed a threat to the soldiers, Israel came out and confirmed that the individuals in the vehicle were in fact civilians. But Shrita, they said that they were gonna do an investigation, which means we're gonna hope that you all forget about this story, but they're not launching an investigation. I don't believe it for a second. They've been getting away, this is not a rare story. They've been getting away with these types of actions again and again and again. And the very people who call it out, people like myself, Cenk Uygur, who draw attention to the savagery of the IDF, get called anti-Semites. We live in this topsy-turvy world where you're considered the bad guy for actually valuing human lives and finding it disgusting, deplorable, unacceptable, criminal for a 7-month-old baby to be shot and killed, shot in the head, because an IDF soldier saw a vehicle full of Palestinian civilians and thought, hey, what a great time for target practice. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little heated here, but I don't understand how people are still asleep when it comes to Israel and the barbarism they consistently carry out against the Palestinian people. What are your thoughts?
I agree with you, and I think one thing that we should remember about this specific case, this happened in Hebron. So this is not Gaza, this is not one of those other areas. This is daily life under occupation for the last 70+ years for the Palestinians. You can go, but you have no idea if you're gonna come back. Wherever you go, you're just going for a family picnic or visiting friends, you may get shot. Your 7-month-old baby may get shot. And in most cases, there will not be a camera around to film it. In fact, for the most cases that have occurred in the past when people didn't have cell phones, there certainly wasn't any cameras around. So there wouldn't even be a pretense of doing an investigation back then. And whether they launched one or not doesn't really matter, because none of these investigations have ever actually amounted to anything. Public pressure in Israel has ensured that even those who were caught raping Palestinian prisoners ultimately got released. So I think it's important to understand this is not a consequence of October 7th. Mm-hmm. This is daily life poor Palestinians for the last several decades under occupation. And it's just terrifying that it has been denied for so long, and that this is the first time for a lot of Americans that they even hear about this.
That's exactly right. And one of the last remaining Christian villages was destroyed, lit on fire by the IDF in the West Bank, by the way, just yesterday. And that got a little bit of attention. You know, the majority of religious people in this country happen to be Christians, and so that's gonna grab their attention. But I mean, victimizing innocent people living in their homes, lighting their homes on fire, killing their children, it's wrong regardless of the religious identity of the individuals who have been targeted. But this keeps happening again and again and again. And then you have, you know, I'm so sick of the West, honestly. The myth of what the West is, it's just such a lie. It's such a lie. I mean, we like to fancy ourselves as, you know, exceptional, as those who bring democracy, and we believe in liberal democracy. We don't believe in anything. We believe in greed. We believe in aiding and abetting Israel as it engages in its slaughter campaigns, its genocides, its land theft. We provide cover for that behavior. Our media is just increasingly controlled and bought up by Zionist interests like the Ellisons. I mean, look at even social media. You know, you have TikTok now, basically controlled by Zionist interests, with Larry Ellison purchasing or having a majority stake in the company. And then you have Benjamin Netanyahu, who has his sights set on doing something about X, because out of all of the social media platforms, you know, X still remains somewhat uncensored, although, you know, there's been this influx of pro-Israel bots that'll like flood your account the second you say anything that's even mildly critical of Israel. And it's just frustrating because it has led to Americans feeling like they need to be silent about this. You know, that university students are afraid about protesting against Israel's actions, or the fact that their university is invested in Israeli companies, or maybe even, you know, the Israeli government. And so I want people to understand there is gonna be an effort to gaslight you into thinking being a good person who believes in human rights, who believes in the value of human life, is a bad thing, that you are some sort of anti-Semite for wanting to protect innocent human lives. Don't let them gaslight you. The butchers here are the Israelis. They just are. And you're seeing it with your own two eyes. And regardless of how much those in positions of power try to tell you otherwise, don't let them fool you, don't let them trick you, don't let them make you think you're crazy, because you're not crazy. This is happening and we shouldn't have anything to do with it. But unfortunately, we as Americans, thanks to our government, have blood on our hands because we are emboldening the state of Israel to carry out these acts. And it's shameful. Anyway. Trina Parsi, you are amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today and co-hosting.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one, and I hope you'll be back soon.
You too. Thank you.
All right, everybody, we're gonna take a brief break. When we come back for hour two, I'll get to that story about Barry Weiss, CNN, a lot to get to there. That's not the only story involving Zionist influence of our media platforms. There's a lot to get to, so stick around, we'll be right back.
Indisputable is still the fastest growing news show in America compared to CNN, Fox News, and 30 other networks. We tell the truth on Indisputable because the truth is indisputable. We go places that other news media outlets refuse to go. When there were human rights abuses happening at the Victorville prison, guards and members of the community contacted us.
You, through your investigative reporting, unearthed very troubling allegations about specific forms of abuse and discrimination in the federal prison system.
It really doesn't take much to be a trusted voice. All it takes is to be fearless, report on matters, be an advocate. I called it the bullpen intentionally because it's a place of preparation. We present individuals who may have an opposing view, so we debate. Sometimes we interview individuals because their stories deserve to be heard. A survivor of significant police misconduct and his attorney We covered this story earlier and to remind you of the horror of one man being shot at damn near 100 times by the police. We take time on this show to showcase the temper tantrums of Karens in the wild. We do this not because we want to see people's emotional outbursts in public, but because these incidents are emblematic of a bigger societal issue taking place across the nation, and it has to be checked.
My friend, my big homie, attorney at law, Benjamin Crump.
I just want to thank you, man. Educated, articulate brothers like yourself speak truth to power. It makes a great difference in changing the landscape in America. So
listen, no matter what you do, don't allow the politics of ideology to evaporate the soul that still exists inside of you. They don't stop, I don't stop. Racism won't stop, I won't stop. Systemic bias won't stop, I won't stop. People still need health care, so I won't stop. People still need criminal justice systems reformed, so I won't stop. You won't stop either.
I'm wearing one of our pieces of merchandise. So the funny thing about the Dragon Squad, and that's what our viewers call themselves. That's the name of the group, but every individual chooses their own name. You might have Cincinnati Dragon. You might have Harry Potter Dragon. We have a Grandma Sunshine Dragon is one of those that I remember. These are people that like to have an element of themselves, their lives, what's significant to them reflected as a part of the community. But the concept of the Dragon Squad is just something I threw away as a joke. I was mocking the Proud Boys, these like right-wing groups that come up with a name for themselves that they think is cool, but it's actually really lame. And I thought, off the top of my head, I can come up with something that's still kind of lame, but much cooler. And so I threw out Dragon Squad and I just moved on with my life. But everybody liked it, and so they kept it going, and so we've embraced it. And I think again, this was during the period of the pandemic. I think it was sort of nice to have a renewed sense of community, a feeling that you're a part of something when everything seems so chaotic. And as a result of that, we've got independent artists online streaming, making beautiful digital art of dragons. We've got, we've released a number of pieces of merchandise that people love sending us photos of them. And then, by the way, for me personally, people send me, like you can probably see in the background, like a knitted dragon someone sent me. There's a dragon book they sent me, dragon board games they send me. People have done like custom ironworks, making dragon bottle openers. Like the fans are super invested in diamond art and things like that. And so it's great that they send this stuff. Sometime we're gonna have to set up a wall of all of it. But yeah, it's definitely brought the community a lot closer together. The fact that we were no longer in this big studio, I felt a lot more personally attached to people. It felt very immediate. And I know that I personally needed the connection.
I love cows. I love cows. I hate flies. I love cows.
Rosa Roscoe, thank you for sending a TYT member gift. You're amazing. And also, I'm so happy I saw your name because I've been meaning to thank you. I received your gift. I love you. Thank you so much. I love that bag. I want to discourage people from sending me gifts, but I'm very grateful for everyone who has. So thank you so much, Rose, and thank you for the TYT gifted membership. I wanted to read some funny comments that I really appreciate because I needed to kind of lighten things up in my own mind. That was such a depressing story that we did before we went to break. But this one's hilarious. So this is Bud Rollin 1 who says, okay, I'll be starting today's show with the sativa dominant hybrid and then moving forward towards indica as a deflection of reality. Dude, man of my own heart or woman of my own heart, I don't know. But I don't mess around with sativas, okay? I do not. The last thing I need is to think more about the world around me and how devastating it is, and that's usually what sativas do for me. But I also wanted to read one comment from a viewer who really appreciated that hour. And I think I lost it. That's okay, I'll find it and I'll make sure to read it. But we'll go to Joseph Knight in our super chat section, who says, feed Israeli intelligence a supposed threat to Americans, then watch what happens. Do they warn us immediately or stay quiet because it is, or stay quiet because it isn't in their interest? Perhaps Victor Ostrovsky was right. I know what you're talking about. If I were in charge, I would definitely do that experiment. And I think my prediction would be correct. Anyway, let's move on. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough time to cover this in the first hour, but I wanted to make sure we covered it today anyway. And it has to do with the latest updates on how Israel is trying to influence our media to ensure that the narratives that we hear in the press are favorable to their own interests. So let's get into it. Instead of, ending the slaughter of innocents and stopping the endless attempts at land theft and border expansion, Israel has instead opted to go in the direction of spending even more money on propaganda to try to convince Americans that they're not the bad ones. But they are the bad ones, and we've all seen what has happened over the last nearly 3 years. Nonetheless, the Israeli government has hired Hollywood producers Daniel Rosenberg and Tim Piper in an effort to sanitize Israel's floundering public image. I don't think floundering is even a good enough word to describe where their public image is at this moment. It's completely in the trash. So the duo's production company, known as Pyro Inc., has received nearly $1 million, 900,000 to be exact, to provide digital content strategy, creative development, video production oversight, and campaign advisory services in connection with a pilot digital communications program. Additionally, services include audience research, content architecture, script writing, asset production, distribution planning, iterative performance analysis. Just stop killing people. Just stop killing people. Stop killing people. That would be the easier option, but Israel can't help itself. Rather than end the slaughter campaigns, they're like, no, but we must do the slaughter campaigns. But that leads to negative PR. So we got it. Let's hire 2 Hollywood producers to try to propagandize Americans into thinking we're the good guys. It's amazing to me, it really is. So the deal was brokered by, of course, Havas Media, Germany. And if you're thinking, that sounds familiar, it's because, yeah, we've talked about them before, and I'll refresh your memory in just a minute. So Havas Media has been contracted by Israel to do crap like this before, and they're doing it yet again. So citing reporting by Nick Cleveland of the Quincy Institute, the Dissident reports that Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs Chief of Staff, Iran Sayovich, hired Pyro Inc., through the German-based subsidiary of the company Havas. Now, Havas has frequently served as an intermediary for Israel, basically providing pretty lucrative contracts to them. So since 2018, the company has received $100 million from Israel. Jesus, $100 million from Israel to promote tourism campaigns and things like that. Havas was also pretty central to our previously reported story about former Trump strategist Brad Parscale, who pushed pro-Israel messaging through his role over at Salem Media Network. And he has raked in $46 million in a single year doing this disgusting work on behalf of the Israelis. And Israel also used Havas to hire SKD Knickenbocker, a firm close to the Democratic Party, to develop a bot-based program on various social media channels that floods the zone with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs pro-Israel message. I have no interest in helping Israel, but I can't help myself. So I'm gonna just go ahead and say it. Your bots suck. They're like the most obvious bots in the world. You're spending millions of American dollars probably because we fund you guys, and then you guys go ahead and use that money against us. But you guys use all that money to buy bots that are so bad, they're so unconvincing, everyone knows they're bots. Just stop killing people. It's that easy. Just stop slaughtering people and then give it, I don't know, maybe a decade, and maybe people will forget how terrible Israel is. If they can maybe withstand the possibility of not killing innocent people for a decade, maybe they can clean up their image a little bit, but they can't help themselves. So they'd rather do the killing because the Greater Israel Project, their border expansion project, is more important to them. And instead, they'll just try to find new avenues in which they can try to convince Americans that they're not awful. So Havas Media Germany has hired them, has hired Pyro Inc. to further the digital efforts of the Israeli government advertising agency to sway US public opinion. Good luck with that. Meanwhile, here in the United States, it looks like Bari Weiss is gonna have even more influence over legacy media. Apparently CBS News wasn't enough. She's looking to destroy other long-standing news agencies here in the US. So let's talk about that. Avowed Zionist fanatic Bari Weiss, who currently heads CBS despite only having a background in opinion journalism, is allegedly being considered to make the editorial decisions over at CNN. Now, I had hinted at this on the show yesterday, but apparently this has to do with the Warner Brothers merger with Skydance, which hasn't been granted yet, but many predict it will be approved. Axios reports that it appears that if Paramount Skydance's deal with Warner Brothers Discovery goes through, Weiss would oversee all news editorial across both CBS and CNN at the same time. So clearly, they don't really have any interest in providing any quality programming or investigative reporting. The whole point here is to micromanage these two news organizations to make sure that everything that comes out from these two news organizations is favorable to Israel and its narrative. That's what this is about. And so a source told Axios that Skydance, which merged with Paramount earlier this year, is very pleased with Bari Weiss's performance over at CBS, even though CBS's viewership has been tanking ever since she took the reins. So the Paramount brass loves Bari Weiss. She has the full confidence of David Ellison, I'm sure, who believes Bari has done a fantastic job as editor-in-chief. Bari has been involved with identifying people she would partner with on the business side. Now, the merger between Skydance and Paramount, as well as Weiss's appointment, was overseen by David Ellison. We've covered that extensively in the past. Ellison, according to the Jerusalem Post, quietly donates quite a bit to the state of Israel and the IDF. In fact, his father, Oracle CEO Larry Ellison, is the single largest donor to the Israeli Defense Forces. So their priority here is carrying water for Israel. And if they see any type of coverage in the media that isn't favorable to Israel, it's okay, we'll just buy up the platform and we'll control it. And that's what's happening. But don't ever say that the Zionists control the media. That would be anti-Semitic, right? Netanyahu directly praised Larry Ellison for purchasing a substantial share of TikTok in order to censor anti-Zionist content. Netanyahu also implied that Israel had its eyes on X, saying the following. Netanyahu boasted about using Elon Musk to manipulate X algorithm in his favor, saying, quote, "The other one that's most important is X. We have to talk to Elon. He's not an enemy, he's a friend. We should talk to him." Nonetheless, as much as they try to censor these platforms, fact of the matter is there's so many people who are disgusted with Israel's conduct that they're speaking out, and some of this content is getting through anyway. The agenda undergirded these movements, these media consolidation was already a huge problem without the Israel component involved. The Israel component is making matters even worse, right? And so the news and the lack of trust in news-related institutions, it makes sense when you consider the fact that more and more Americans have access to independent media where they're getting truthful, in many cases, not in all cases, they're getting truthful reporting. And then if they turn to legacy media that certainly has been bought up by the Ellisons, they can see how untrustworthy these sources happen to be. So again, the lack of trust in these institutions is not without merit. That's what I'm trying to say here. But still, the mergers still have their detractors, as Axios reports. While federal regulators are expected to approve the merger, several Democratic state attorneys general and European regulators are still evaluating the merger. Oh, okay. The Democratic state attorneys general, they're evaluating the merger. Oh, we're going to evaluate the mergers. Yeah, sure, whatever. I don't buy it. The merger will go through, the Zionists will have their way, but we still have people power. We still saw what happened over the last nearly 3 years. There is no amount of propaganda, there's no amount of gaslighting that's going to move me on what I view Israel to be, and I will ensure that people get accurate reporting on what Israel's up to. Because our future, the future of our country literally relies on it. This parasitic alliance with Israel needs to end. And unless we Americans make it abundantly clear that we will not tolerate this, we're gonna keep getting abused like this, and we're gonna keep seeing our media get snatched up by Zionist interests. And so remember, I said it yesterday, I'll say it again. You deserve what you're willing to tolerate. We gotta take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about a bombshell Epstein story. Although, what you should be asking yourself as I give you the details of that story is, who leaked this to the New York Times and why did they leak it? We'll be right back. All right, earlier I said that there was a comment I wanted to read, but I lost it. It was from Jonathan Borjani, who said he enjoyed the first hour, and that makes me really, really happy. Jonathan, thank you so much. Oh, here it is. When will someone stop Israel? Great hour, loved the live updates. Thank you so much. All right, let's go to our super chats, where Rose Orozco says, like, share, and subscribe, family, with a heart emoji. Thank you so much, Rose. And then you have Sage and Candle. You know who else does Israeli propaganda? Ben Glebe. You're right about that. And I don't know what to say to you about it. He hasn't been on the show in a while. So, it's amazing. Like, you can be an Israeli who's honest and sees what's going on and speaks out against it. It's amazing to me when people think we don't see what's happening. Like, we see what's happening. And it's increasingly difficult for them to try to defend the indefensible, which is why people like Ben Shapiro refuse to have debates with people like Dave Smith. He'll have debates with like college students, but people like Dave Smith, who are well-read on issues of foreign policy, Shapiro would never debate. Thank you to CDN Norse Dogdad for the TYT membership. Beck Kip says, as an Australian, can I say how much I hate listening to your decrepit and deranged orange president? You can't even mention his name in Australia without invoking rage. He's an embarrassment to America. Preach it, sister. I know, or brother. Sorry, I don't know what your gender is, my apologies. Let's go over to Boomer Dragon Cat, who says, the Anna Banana Week we didn't know we needed. Thank you so much. Let's get back to the show. What's up, everyone? Welcome. Drake Keen says, TYT with the awesome guest host gang. Give it up. Yeah, thank you. I'm really excited about this week. I hope you guys have been enjoying the show. It's been a lot of work. I don't know if you guys can tell, but usually when I'm hosting the show with Cenk, if I'm having an off day, I can really take a load off because homeboy can talk, right? But when he's not here and I'm like really fully in charge, it's a lot, it really is. So I'm looking forward to his return, but I have been really enjoying the show, and special thanks to everyone from the producers to the graphics artists to the editors for making this show happen every day without fail. You guys are amazing. I also want to read a quick comment about MAGA gaslighting. This is from Galawarik, who says, to Anna's point about MAGA gaslighting, their decision or derision of the term woke is a perfect example. Being woke is not negative, it's being aware and fighting back against repression, but MAGA has twisted being woke into an insult. I actually have a point to make about that. It's related, but something that I've been wanting to vent about is some elements of the right have used the word woke to attack people who are maybe excessively identitarian in some cases, right? I don't think woke started off as a bad thing, but some people became too identitarian. You have to admit that. And the identity obsessed get labeled woke. And then you have, what was the name? That guy, James Lindsay, right? Then he turns around and dubs right-wingers who are concerned about our alliance with Israel the woke right, which doesn't make any sense because isn't the woke one James Lindsay who's overly obsessed with providing cover for the Israelis? I mean, come on. Like, I don't understand how he like got away with the whole woke right moniker. But that guy is so in bed with Zionists, it's amazing. Anyway, let's get to the news. Let's get to something a little more interesting, but also you should be asking yourselves, in a story like this where you have a bunch of leakers involved, why did they leak this to the New York Times? Let's get into it. The New York Times has published a Epstein bombshell. Now, much of the reporting here we knew about, but we do get a behind the scenes look into how the Trump administration was basically freaking out over the Epstein files behind the scenes, but more importantly, how Trump's senior advisors gathered in the Situation Room multiple times to basically figure out what their game plan was in responding to the absolute rage members of their own base were lodging against them because it was abundantly clear that there was a cover-up of the Epstein files. This story is pretty incredible, but remember, someone or maybe multiple people within the Trump administration clearly leaked this. Someone who was in the Situation Room clearly leaked this to the New York Times. And you should ask yourselves why. All right, with that in mind, here are the details. So at one point during one of the earlier meetings in the Situation Room, apparently Vice President JD Vance had suggested that, hey, you know what, maybe we just get out in front of this. Maybe we do engage in transparency. And he suggested that Tucker Carlson interview Ghislaine Maxwell so that she can state that Trump has never been part of any wrongdoing tied to Jeffrey Epstein. And he really wanted the administration to release the files according to this New York Times report. And so Vance argued that even the unsubstantiated claims about Trump should go out because he felt that they were gonna surface anyway. So why not get out in front of it and show that there's really nothing to be concerned about when it comes to Trump, because the administration is the one who released this in good faith, right? That's the play that he had in mind. Now, his idea was rejected, as you can imagine. Blanche also laid out what he saw as their best options. So option number one, apparently, was to petition federal district courts in Florida and New York to unseal the grand jury testimonies, the secret transcripts of prosecutors' presentations of witnesses and evidence in their efforts to obtain indictments in the past Epstein-related cases. As those were almost certain to contain no significant new information, everyone agreed that this option was a good idea, and not only because a release was unlikely to damage the president. So get a load of this. This is why they thought this was their best option. Under the federal rules of criminal procedure, the bar for any release is exceptionally high. if the courts refuse to unseal them, as Blanche predicted, they could shift the blame for withholding the Epstein material away from the Trump administration and onto the judges. And all the better if the judges had been appointed by Democratic presidents. You get what I mean here? Like, they're like, hey, why don't we do this? Why don't we advertise that we're pushing for these documents to be released, from these court proceedings, knowing that it is very unlikely that judges will agree to releasing these documents. And then we can say it's out of our hands. It's out of our hands. Now, Blanche's suggestion would make it look like the White House wanted these materials to be released, knowing that it was unlikely to happen. Amazing. So option 2, by the way, involved having the Justice Department question Ghislaine Maxwell and publicly release the transcript. Now, we know that Todd Blanche met with Ghislaine Maxwell privately, and that meeting, for the most part, is shrouded in secrecy. Nonetheless, Vance floated the idea of Maxwell getting questioned during a congressional hearing instead. Blanche thought it would be too hard to get her to sign on to doing that, that she would expect something in return, quid pro quo. And so at that point, White House counsel Warrington jumps in and says, look, we've got some options in terms of what we can offer her. The way the story was reported, Warrington wasn't suggesting he was in favor of either option, but he was saying, look, we could either get her a pardon or have her sentence reduced. That yielded strong disapproval from members of Trump's cabinet. They thought that's not gonna look good if we give her a pardon or if we shorten her sentence. So the consensus was to go along with the first option of calling for the release of the grand jury material, knowing that it was unlikely that the judges would agree to releasing it in the first place. And Trump went along with that, although reluctantly so, as is reported in the Times. They also get into Bindergate, and that part of the reporting is pretty incredible. So in the meantime, as you know, you have Trump's cabinet meeting in the Situation Room, trying to figure out, like, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? People are freaking out over the Epstein files. You have former Attorney General Pam Bondi, then Attorney General, of course, engaging in that stunt with the binders. And it does appear as though that stunt was done without the approval of the administration, because they learned about it as it was happening and they panicked because they didn't know what was in the binders. And they were worried that the binders would contain documents that, how shall I say this, wouldn't be so favorable to Trump's reputation and image. Let's just put it that way. So Keir Starmer, by the way, happened to be visiting the White House that day, and there was, again, a lot of fear that something really nasty about Trump is about to come out. Now, over at the Justice Department, officials were reviewing the Epstein material, which included as many as 6 million pages of files. Most of Trump's advisors had rejected out of hand the idea of releasing the FBI's raw interview notes. They wanted to avoid putting out anything that could damage the president. And by the way, that appeared to be the #1 priority throughout this very lengthy piece. It seems as though what they wanted to prioritize, what they were worried about, was Trump's image more than anything else. And so Blanche determines that they can't put out the files and wanted to convey that message in a public memo. And so this was a huge problem for FBI Director Kash Patel and former Deputy FBI Director Dan Bongino. According to the reporting here, Dan Bongino in particular was very fiery in pushing for the immediate release of the surveillance footage from the prison where Epstein was allegedly found dead. Now, Bongino hated the Justice Department's Nothing to See Here memo being drawn up for public release. He told Patel this would in no way align with their promises of transparency after taking over the FBI, and he objected to putting the FBI seal on the letterhead, but he was overruled. So let's just pause for a second. This story, you have to ask yourselves, okay, this was obviously leaked to the Times. Whoever the leaker was in on these deliberations. Who looks good in this piece? Whose reputation might be saved in this piece? And honestly, it's undeniable. Dan Bongino. Dan Bongino is the one who comes out looking like the good one in this reporting. Now, mind you, Dan Bongino could have blown the whistle. That would have been the difficult thing to do. He didn't do it. So if he is the leaker, think about how rascally that is. Think about the cowardice of going along with the cover up while you're in the administration, and then potentially, we don't know for sure, leaking this to the New York Times in an effort to rehabilitate your reputation because Homeboy's podcast ain't doing well, okay? Anyway, let's get back to both Patel and Bongino. So apparently Kash Patel privately said that he was sharing many of Bongino's concerns. But remember, he's a good boy. Kash Patel's a very good boy for Daddy Trump. So he provided his support in an internal email that he sent on July 2nd. And I should note, obviously I'm sure there were Freedom of Information requests and things like that for this reporting. But in the email, he wrote the following: "Thanks for the edits. And I still believe this is the correct vehicle forward," Patel wrote, meaning he wanted the cover up. So he wrote that to a small group of colleagues, including Todd Blanche. "I'm happy to add any additional sentences to complete the shortfall, or to compete the shortfall. But I do think we address specifically why more can't be released as it relates to specific topics, i.e. court order, child sexual abuse material, victim protections, etc." Okay, but what was even more telling of these deliberations that were taking place, especially as it pertains to that memo, inside the White House, Trump had no interest in releasing anything. And senior officials, including Susie Wiles and Blair, were initially unconvinced about the reach of the Epstein crisis. They told colleagues that Republican voters didn't care. And they had early data from Trump's chief pollster, Tony Fabrizio, to demonstrate it. You might be asking yourselves, Tony Fabrizio, who was that guy? He sounds familiar. I feel like he was in the news recently. He was in the news recently. It's worth noting that Tony Fabrizio was a consultant for various Israeli politicians, including Benjamin Netanyahu. And then right now, he is serving as Naftali Bennett's pollster. Naftali Bennett is a challenger to Netanyahu in upcoming elections for prime minister. So these are people who are in bed with Israel. Israel has been implicated in the release of the Epstein files that we've been able to see. Israel has an interest in not releasing the files. So just something to keep in mind. All right, so you have Susie Wiles, who worked on Benjamin Netanyahu's 2020 re-election campaign, downplaying the severity of the backlash from the right wing in regard to the Epstein files cover up. And then you have this pollster who's like consulted for various Israeli politicians, trying to reinforce that notion with some poll that I don't know if that poll was credible. I know for a fact it's not credible. Obviously, there was a lot of backlash from the right in regard to this cover up. So something to keep in mind. Now, going back to Bongino, the Times reports that Bongino told anyone who would listen that this was a grave miscalculation. Quote, "It's not an online story," he told White House advisors. "You don't understand." So they did end up releasing that memo. This was July of last year, along with that doctored footage from the prison Epstein was being held in, and that led to a lot of backlash. Remember, there was a minute missing from that surveillance footage that Pam Bondi released. And the day that memo was released, Bongino showed up to a daily Justice Department meeting with the FBI staff and the Attorney General, Pam Bondi. And he decided to draw his ire toward Bondi pretty aggressively. This was something that we had heard about earlier. Now we have a little more clarity about what was allegedly said. So apparently he said to her, "You effed this thing up from the start." He didn't censor himself, he said the word. "The way you've been talking about this, that dumb effing charade with the Epstein files, the they're on my desk nonsense, all the promises to the folks out there." And he allegedly considered resigning and then leaking the files. I don't believe that for a second, but allegedly that's what he was thinking about doing, but was talked out of it. Privately, he seethed. In conversations with confidants, he lamented what the job had cost him millions of dollars in podcast revenue, family time, his audience. He was getting torn apart over a strategy he had opposed from the start. Again, this is my speculation. I think he's the leaker. My speculation, because he's the only one who really comes out looking good here, and JD Vance to some extent. Now, back to Bondi, this one other excerpt from the reporting really stood out to me. So apparently Charlie Kirk had held a Turning Point USA event that turned into an Epstein grievance fest, with one speaker after another bashing Pam Bondi over her handling of the situation. And apparently Trump took time out of his day to call Kirk to scold him. Homeboy really didn't want the Epstein files released. And the fact that the number one priority among his administration or administration officials was ensuring that his reputation wouldn't be harmed, that anything unsavory in the Epstein files about him wouldn't be released, I think tells you a lot about what's going on here. Might even explain why Trump is willing to do anything and everything Israel wants in the Middle East, even though it is destroying his legacy. It has fractured his base. It is destroying the global economy, certainly the US economy. Why would he do all that? Unless maybe the Israelis have something on him. I don't know, again, speculation. But it is what it is, and you can make of that what you will. We're gonna take a quick break. When we come back, we'll actually do a more robust segment on the economy, because there is a new Labor Department report, and you should know about it. No, okay, so Yestrodamus says, damn it, I'm out of cigars, see you tomorrow, dudes. Why? You don't have to smoke cigars while you watch the show, or is that a reference to a movie or something? Cigars are bad for you, you shouldn't do the cigars, okay? Smoke weed instead. No, I'm kidding, don't smoke weed. I don't think I'm allowed to endorse things like that on the show, right? I don't know what the laws or rules are. Anyway, let's get to other things. We've got Embedded Dude who says the majority may say they're Christian, but they're not really. It makes people, they think it makes people accept them. I think there are a lot of people who purport to be Christians who don't actually practice Christianity or what Christianity entails. I think you're right about that. Let's go to our Twitch subs. NDH101 says, too bad there isn't a world power to take out that genocidal nation of scum. Well, there isn't a world power that wants to do the right thing. That's definitely true. Octo Squiddy says, are the Hamas tunnels in the tents? They weren't in the hospitals or the schools like Israel said. We know what's happening. We know what's happening. It's just, they're brazen. It's abundantly clear. They're just trying to kill people. Let's go to more of our member comments where Mariah Hughes says, David Rovix has released a song about Jank. Do you think he's aware? I doubt he's aware because I'm not aware and I actually listen to music. So I hope it's a good one. Let's go to, let's see. 37 and thriving Pakistani American. I'm gonna read your comment when we come back from the break because I am running out of time. Brunton ATX in our X comments makes a really good point, and I would actually love this. Let's hear from the pilots, like the other rescued pilots that they never like to talk about. I know, right? We don't know the identity of those rescued pilots. We don't know what happened. I mean, that whole situation is shrouded in secrecy, and I'd like to know why. So excellent point. Thank you for sharing that with us. 37 and thriving Pakistani American says, if anyone is interested, check out Thara founded by two Syrian brothers, or I'm sorry, Thara AI, founded by two Syrian brothers, like ChatGPT, but better, no server storage, open source, just $15. Okay, I mean, thank you for the super chat, but if you guys wanna check that out, check that out. I personally think, look, if you are, let's say, writing an email and you're worried about grammatical or spelling errors and you wanna run it through AI to make sure it's perfect, okay, like I don't have a problem with that. I do have a problem seeing more and more people just like turn their brain off and just rely on whatever Grok tells them, even though we know that the Israelis have been working real hard to influence these AI models and what they give you in terms of responses to very specific questions about the Middle East. And I've been experimenting with that. It's been awful. Like I'm sure you guys have noticed it with X as well. It'll tell you the opposite of reality. It's amazing, and whatever. But okay, yeah, I mean, if that's a solution to the biased AIs, check it out. All right, let's go to our next story. I want to talk about the economy because the Labor Department has reported that things are getting worse, and Trump is responsible for it because when he came into office, inflation was beginning to get under control. That's not the case anymore. The US economy continues to be in free fall with the exception of the stock market to some extent, thanks to the ongoing war in Iran, which is being fought on behalf of Israeli interests. Now today, the Labor Department stated that inflation rose 4.2% higher in May compared to a year ago. And that's an increase from April's year-over-year inflation reading of 3.8%. So that goes to show you that inflation is now accelerating, and it marks a 3-year high for the consumer price index. So you probably won't be surprised to find out that what happens to be driving this inflation is in fact the war, which has limited oil and natural gas supplies, which means that energy is more expensive, which means that, delivering goods and services is going to be more expensive. So the energy index accounted for over 60% of the increase in the consumer price index from the previous month, according to the Labor Department. Energy prices increased 3.9% in the month of May, an acceleration from 3.8% in April. The index for gasoline jumped 7% on the month and was up more than 40% from a year earlier. So just to give you a little taste of how this all kind of trickles down, right? Energy is more expensive. That means everything else is gonna be more expensive, including your travel. So this is gonna get a lot worse, but for now, airline tickets were up 2.7% from April. Meanwhile, Americans' paychecks have not been keeping up with the pace of inflation, meaning you might be working harder than ever, but you're making less or you're earning less for your hard work. A separate report from the Labor Department that was released on Wednesday showed that inflation outpaced year-over-year wage gains in May for the second month in a row. So this was true in April, it was true in May. And considering the fact that the United States has started to reignite kinetic warfare against Iran, and Iran is responding with ballistic missiles, that means the war is gonna continue. And there is no end in sight, as far as we know, that could lead to the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, the free flow of oil and gas, and so things are gonna get worse. Inflation-adjusted hourly earnings declined 0.7% on the year in May after dropping 0.3% in April. There are other ominous signs that you should be aware of. So one of them actually came to us last week when the Bank of America Securities warned investors to get out of the stock market. And that makes me worry too for all the people who are invested in their 401ks, their IRAs. So here's what was said during that investor call. There are too many red flags, strategists wrote in a note dated June 5th. Take profits, they advise. Meaning, like, take your money and run. Like, we're about to be devastated. And by the way, this is what the Bank of America is saying to their investors. So just, if you want to take it with a grain of salt, fine. But remember, the #1 crime in America, like the crime that you get punished for the harshest at this point, is lying to investors, defrauding investors. Like that is, you can't do that. Killing innocent children in Gaza, that's totally fine. But lying to investors, no, you can't do that. Bank of America stated that 70% of its bear market signposts, as they call it, had been triggered. And that includes consumer confidence data, not looking good. Merger and acquisition scores, not looking good. Credit stress and stocks with high price to earnings ratios. So you can tell things are bad when Jim Cramer, who's one of the hosts over at CNBC, is berating Trump officials for not caring at all about the low-income Americans who are really bearing the brunt of this devastating economy. So let's hear a little of what he had to say.
What you're saying is that everybody's doing well. There's a considerable part of the people who are not doing well in this country, and they need the help of the Fed. And I am surprised that you're not addressing those people, the people who make less than $40,000 in this country, who need help, who've seen SNAP benefits decline, who have the higher gasoline prices because of a war in Iran. What about them?
What about them? Well, Trump was actually asked about that today. And I think you should hear what Trump had to say. F1.
You know what I really love? I love the inflation. You know why? Because as soon as this war is over, I can say it now. Something you didn't know. We've been taking out millions of barrels of oil. Nobody knows it. You know who doesn't know about it? Iran, until right now. We took out the other night 22 ships. Late at night with no lights, because they don't have any radar, because we blasted the crap out of it. We took out, that's why oil's $85 a barrel.
He doesn't care. He doesn't care. Restarting the war against Iran is going to be devastating for the global economy. He knows that. And it goes beyond the price of oil and gas. It also has to do with the fact that 1/3 of the world's fertilizer transits through the Strait of Hormuz. Without the fertilizer, or more importantly, with the limited supply of fertilizer, farmers are gonna have a hard time getting access to the fertilizer they need for their crops. Or if they're lucky enough to have access, it's gonna be a lot more expensive. And you think that they're just gonna eat the costs? No, those costs will be passed down to the consumer, meaning we're going to see a lot more inflation at the grocery store and pretty much in every other sector of the economy, because the economy runs on fuel. And the price of fuel has shot up as a result of this war. But Trump couldn't care less. You wanna know why he couldn't care less? Because homeboy in the background is wheeling and dealing, okay? Showing up to China with a bunch of corporate executives who lead companies that he's heavily invested in based on public disclosures of his investments. You wanna know why he took him to China? Because he's looking to make deals between these companies in China. So, the value of their shares shoot up. Homeboy gets to make some money off of that. And then you've got his dirty crypto deals. He rolled out a new freaking coin ahead of the UFC fight on his birthday. I mean, his second term has made him very, very wealthy, billions of dollars. You think he gives a damn when it comes to farmers? You think he cares that the price of food is gonna go up a little bit? He's not gonna feel it. He doesn't care. Our government hates us. They hate us. And the question is, why are we tolerating it? I can't stand when people become obsessive, giant super fans of politicians. Did you think that you're supposed to serve them? They're supposed to serve us. But we forgot that, didn't we? And so they use public office to enrich themselves, to become wealthier. And this goes beyond the Trump administration. How many members of Congress engage in insider trading? How many members of Congress came in, ordinary working class individuals, and left with hundreds of millions of dollars in their freaking stock portfolios? How many of them? These people are scum, but we deserve them because we tolerate them. We tolerate them. They hate us, they rub it in our faces every single day. They don't serve us, they take our money, they funnel it to whatever pet project they have, including Israel. And the rest of us are just left suffering, complaining about this failure of a government that we have to operate under. But we gotta start thinking a little differently, a little outside the box. And I can't roll my eyes hard enough when I find myself in a conversation where it's like, oh yeah, well, the Democrats did this. Oh yeah, well, the Republican, they're both trash. How about they're both trash? All right, let's get to the next story. Let's do G.
If you're opposed to AI, if you're organizing against AI, if you're going to, local meetings to try to block a data center from being placed, you are getting put on a government list as an extremist. This is insane. Why wouldn't the extremists be the people trying to put the AI data centers in? They're the ones who are blowing through our fresh water. They're the ones who are polluting everything in sight.
Just based on what we do know right now, what is happening right now, we can say there are threats to people from AI. And if you don't believe that, first of all, think about who's developing AI. So if this machine, this technology, AI, is being created by people like Sam Altman or the Google guys, you can expect that, well, I don't know, programs built by some of the least trustworthy people in the world probably shouldn't be trusted.
Clearly, Americans across the political spectrum are concerned about the impact of artificial intelligence on our lives, and they're concerned about the fact that it appears that our government really has no interest in regulating this technology as it continues to take over more and more of our jobs, more and more of our lives. Meanwhile, big tech and AI lobbyists have been whining and dining congressional staffers and even treating them to some swanky retreats in an effort to squash any resistance to their policy agenda. And I want to give you a specific example because Sludge, which follows corruption in our government, they do excellent reporting on this, has just reported about a retreat to Austin, all expenses paid. The AI industry had multiple congressional staffers on this trip. It took place between May 26th through the 28th. Several staffers took part in this all expenses paid trip to Austin for a retreat called Building the American Tech Stack from Foundation to Application. They're such self-important pricks. Anyway, a lobbying organization known as the ITI Institute bankrolled this retreat. And you should know a little more about them. They kind of fall under the umbrella. It's like a tentacle of the Information Technology Industry Council, or the ITIC, which is a lobbying group that's been around for like 100 years, okay? So its members are the most powerful companies imaginable. So here's an example, here's a list. You've got Amazon, Apple, Google, Meta, Microsoft, Nvidia, the who's who of we do not want regulation, please do not regulate us. So the ITIC managed to dodge federal regulations on lobbying. And yes, believe it or not, we still have some rules when it comes to lobbying, but they were able to dodge those rules, those regulations, because the trip was technically organized through the ITI Institute, which does not technically employ lobbyists. So, it's a loophole, but at the end of the day, this is lobbyist driven, right? This is a lobby representing tech interests in this case, all right? So the staffers spoke with the heads of government policy at Google, Dell, and Applied Materials. They also got to mingle with executives from Zoom, NVIDIA, and Cisco, and you should know who the staffers are. More importantly, you should see the mix of political identities represented among the staffers to give you a sense of the illusion of the two-party system that we're living under right now, okay? So the staffers included, and we like to name names, Nolan Ahern, who works as a senior policy advisor for House Majority Whip Tom Emmer, a Republican. Don't worry, Democrats, you're represented. Leah Uhrig, who is the legislative director for Representative Ted Lieu, a Democrat out of California, gross. William Smith, chief of staff to Representative Nick Langworthy, a Republican. And then you have Hardin Spencer, a legislative director for Representative Valerie Fauci, a Democrat. You know, when you've got the corruption baked into your political system, you better believe the lobbyists are gonna try to, influence both sides, obviously. It's just like the Israel lobby. You think the Israel lobby only focuses on the right or the left? No, they bribe most politicians. Doesn't matter what their political ideology is. Anyway, but Ted Lieu and Fauci, the Democrats, are co-chairs of the House Democrats' AI task force. Oh yeah, that really does inspire a lot of confidence that they're gonna do the right thing and they're gonna regulate AI at the behest of the American people, right? To look out for us, right? Now let's discuss what the members of the ITIC are hoping to gain from this educational trip. So the ITIC has publicly and repeatedly called for a national standard that would override any state regulations pertaining to AI, and its member companies argue that this would pose a compliance burden if there's this patchwork of different regulations state to state. The group reported spending a total of $720,000 on federal lobbying in the first quarter of the year after spending record amounts of $2.9 million in each of the past 2 years. So they're shelling out this money because they want to make sure AI is rolled out with no regulations or as little regulation as possible. That's the real game here. And they're taking these congressional staffers on vacations to convince them to avoid regulation. That's how corrupt our system is. tyt.com/join to become a member. Bonus episode is next. See you there.
They want to make you drink Starbucks every day from now until forever.